This is The World We Leave Our Children, How I Became a Free Software Extremist. I wrote this article. I wrote this piece. It's not a long piece. Back in the summer of 2015, right after the birth of my second child, my first son, my oldest son. And this was published by Network World back then, just because I thought it was an interesting thing to put out there. It's very personal. Very, very personal. And this will probably resultingly, as I look back, almost 5 years into the past, as being probably one of the more personal videos and podcasts that I've possibly ever produced. But I think it's an interesting topic, and it's because it deals with core philosophy of how we interact with, how we engage with software and the like, of open source, of free software, of closed source, and every variation therein. And I would like to read it to you today with a couple of digressions as I go, because it's interesting looking back on that moment. For me, that really was a moment that my mindset changed a fair bit. And my mindset has changed a little bit since then. But it's still interesting to look back on. So I'm going to read it for you now. But first, I would like to point out that if you have not been to Lunduke.com lately, you must go there because it is friggin' rad. Almost every day, there's new articles coming up. If you don't subscribe to the RSS feed at Lunduke.com, go there, grab it. Also, so many of you complained over the last few years that I did not have any SSL at Lunduke.com. There was no HTTPS. It was just HTTP. And I dug in my heels. I said, no. Well, now both are available. So you can HTTPS to your heart's content over at Lunduke.com with literally some of the best articles that you're going to find about Linuxiness and open sourciness and old computeriness and all sorts of things. So go there, check it out. Check out the podcast. Go click on the library or the YouTube or the RSS podcast link or whatever. Watch and enjoy the show however the heck you want. You deserve it. The one show that you don't normally get access to that you did this week is Ask Lunduke. That's a show I do every Monday where you get to ask me questions and I attempt to answer them. Questions like, why does closed source software exist? Which is a great question. And tons more, some nerdy stuff, some Linuxy stuff, some non-Linuxy stuff. It's really all over the map. But if you would like to ask questions for that, you got to be a supporter of the show. You got to join the hundreds and hundreds of people that support this show every single month on Patreon. Go to Lunduke.com, find the links for Support the Lunduke Journal, and it's fantastic. That gives you access to that show, which is a little thank you for all of the support that the supporters of this show give every single month. I couldn't do this without you, and well, you just make it wonderful. So. And I would also like to thank Linode, because Linode is amazing. Linode supports shows like this and conferences about Linux and open source and free software. Plus, they make amazing servers. Like you go to Linode.com and you can set up a great little server in the sky and run Linux on it and SSH into it, and it's amazing. They got good prices, they got good uptime, they got great speed, they got data centers on like 87,000 different continents. It's fantastic. Go to Linode.com/Lunduke to sign up and you get a $20 credit. $20 credit. You can't go wrong with that. All right. Let's read this article here. On September 8th of 2015, my son was born. Being my second child, I was far less, let's just call it, completely freaked out and scared that everything was going to go wrong and I was going to accidentally kill my baby. I wasn't exactly super chill about the event, but far more so than with my first child. It's totally a thing. Man, the more kids you have, the more chill you get. I have 3 kids. This is right after the birth of my second kid. And man, with each kid, like, everything else aside, when you're raising the kid, when you're holding the kid in your arms, with that first kid, you're almost afraid you're going to drop the kid. By the time you got kid number 3, you know how to hold a baby. You got this. You're just not worrying about that aspect of it quite so much. Anyway, I digress. Relaxed enough that as I held the little guy in my arms that night, Mom sound asleep, my mind filled with thoughts of the future, of the world that I leave to both him and his big sister, and now his younger brother. Most days I find myself focused on immediate and practical matters, making sure there's a roof over their heads, food in their bellies, and knowledge in their brains. It's a dad thing. That's what you do. But on that night, I'm sure moms do too. I'm not a mom, so I can't speak to that. But on that night, my mind found its way to a far more philosophical place. Not so much how do I prepare this child for the world that exists as what do I want the world to be like for him? A little digression. Over the years, I've had countless debates with some of the greatest minds in the free and open source software world. Seriously, so many, from Richard Stallman onwards. I have no idea why people gave me the time of day they did, but personal, private conversations, moments on stage where I was debating with people, podcasts and video shows where we were debating things. It was just, I've gotten the chance to talk to some of the coolest people. It's amazing. Specifically, about how to practically achieve a higher level of open source within a world that is so often closed and proprietary. How do we encourage companies to add a little open source here and there? How do we find the mechanisms to fund small amounts of free software in an otherwise largely closed source ecosystem? These have been the questions that I've asked. This has been much of my focus, and almost without fail, the great proponents of free software have dug in their heels when I present such questions. Specifically, to be clear, of how do we get a little more software here and there be open? To which they say no. There is simply no room for half measures and compromises. The source code is either free and open or it is unethical and cannot be tolerated. To which, again, almost without fail, I become indignant and declare that stance to be far too hardcore and extremist to be practical. Seriously, this just happened regularly. With dare I say, most of the big free software proponents over the years. I managed to have them on one show or another, one panel at a conference or another, and we go at it. And it's interesting because I've always been like, open source is good, free software is good, but my approach was always much more tolerant of closed source stuff. Like maybe some closed source can be good too, but let's just edge towards a little more open source and free software. That was always more my approach in those early days, especially. And that just didn't sit well with people who were more like, no, free software, end of story. These conversations, and in some cases heated arguments, have been interesting. They really have. But in the end, I remain staunchly set in the let's find a practical solution to have a little more free software mindset. That was always my approach. And the free software extremists remained extreme, unmovable. I think both sides found that rather frustrating. All right, back to the night my son was born. As I held him, I found myself thinking back on my own struggles in making my own source code free. And I came from a career of making closed source software for myself and for other companies since the late 1980s, or not 1980s, late 1990s, late 1980s. It was a whole different period of time for me. I was wearing an ALF t-shirt back then. I still would like to wear an ALF t-shirt now that I think about it. But I digress. In making my own source code free, thinking on a world divided between freedom and restriction, between openness of technology and a world of litigiously enforced software patents, between total control over your personal data and a complete lack of personal privacy. That core struggle between free and not free is a purely artificial one. It is a struggle that we as humans created for ourselves, probably because we're dumb. Source code is inherently open until you close it. Your personal information is inherently your own until you grant others the right to take it away from you. We are free until someone comes along and takes that freedom away. Or perhaps worse, we give it away willingly in exchange for a shiny new app for our shiny new smartphone, or the illusion that we must give up that freedom for the sake of our current economic system and security. And when I say economic system here, I'm not talking about capitalism versus communism or anything that large. I'm talking about really focused on a software scale of talking about how the economics of software works, that economic system. It was at that moment, as I looked down at my sleeping son's face, that I realized something about myself. In my mind, there was no longer any excuse to keep things closed, to keep things locked down, to give away rights to our personal data, not even a little bit. I simply would not allow a world that would treat my son and daughter in such a despicable, horrible way. A world that would force him to either give up his freedom or fight tooth and nail to try and reclaim freedoms that he should have never lost in the first place. I had, somewhere along the line, become a free software extremist. Just like all those extremists that I'd spent so many years arguing and debating with. It just took 2 kids to get me there. So that was where I was at in the summer of 2015. And honestly, not a ton has changed in that time. I went from being a casual advocate for open source and free software to a free software is the right way sort of a person by the time 2015 hit. Now, here I am in 2020, not quite 5 years later, and that's mostly where my mind still exists. I've become a much more understanding over the last few years of little bits of closed source here and there, like in isolated ways, like old video games, old pieces of software that are closed. I'd rather have them than not have them. So if the only way I can have them is via closed source, well, so be it. But when I flash forward to modern stuff, and I think through what I'm willing to give up in exchange for in the computing world, I realize I'm not trending back towards that more practicality mindset, a focused mindset that I used to have. And it's not because I'm less practical now than I was then. I think just the opposite, in fact. Just to do a total digression. I need to shift a little bit in my seat here. Just a total digression. I am very much a capitalist. I like capitalism. As far as a broader overall market approach goes, I like capitalism. I just do. I also like my steak rare. So if that tells you anything about the kind of guy I am. But having the ability, the rights, the freedom to close up your source code, I think it should exist. People should have the right to close things down. But if we're really being honest with ourselves about what is in the best interest for our economies and for the preservation of both arts and science, I think we have to admit that having the source code be available, even if we opt to not do anything with it right now, just having it available is a better, more practical, long-term approach. And I know this is mostly just preaching to the choir, but realistically, I don't see a lot of room for compromise there. A little room. Maybe more room than I felt there was in 2015 when I wrote this, but not by a lot. Having stuff free is great. And I'm not here to preach it, more to catalog where I'm at this point. Having stuff free is great. It makes things better. It's sort of like the right to repair. If I buy a John Deere tractor, I need the right to be able to repair my own tractor. If I don't have that right, that could be a big problem. Now, there's no saying that tractor is going to need repairs, or that I'd be up for doing it myself anyway. Just the way it is. But the ability to make those repairs, the right to repair, means that I can be more self-reliant in my own capitalistic endeavors. That means that when I have hardware, software, equipment that I need, that I rely upon to do whatever work I want to do, to engage in whatever capitalistic endeavor I set my mind to, being self-reliant, being able to modify the tools, being able to update the tools, to fix the tools, to do security audits of those tools, means that I will be more able to focus on earning a profit and on making something cool and on doing awesome things. I mean, it is just an obvious thing. Again, if people want to close down source code, I'm not going to fight them. I don't think they should be compelled by law to open source things. But it's the right course of action. And I think we've got enough case studies at this point to point to it's the right way to go. And yeah, me having kids made me more extreme in my viewpoints there. I don't feel a lot of wiggle room here. Like if I'm releasing software right now, it's open, right? More than that, it's free, capital F. It's just the way I would go, regardless of what it is that I'd be building. Because if I'm making something that's artistic, maybe it's a game, maybe it's a piece of software I just view as a piece of art, I would want it to be able to be enjoyed by people 100 years from now. And as we've seen, if you have closed source stuff, sometimes it's hard to get things running 5 years later. So open it up. If I'm making something that's a tool that someone needs to use, well, having it closed down just basically takes away their right to repair. And what a mean thing. I don't like that thing. I like nicer things. I like free software. Anyway, it's a bit of a digression. I simply wanted to have this here because I wanted to make sure that this moment in time, this random moment in time where I had a bit of a mental shift in relation to open source and free software and closed source and all of that stuff. I wanted to have that here and cataloged because so many of the websites that have published my works in the past have kind of gone a little flaky. Like Lunduke Journal, the owner pulled its plug, and Network World, half of my old articles got like broken images and everything everywhere. And but this way, they're just here. They're just here. Anyway, I'd have no idea if this was at all interesting or helpful to any of you, nor how many of you are still remaining awake as they watch this episode. But I'm curious to know how many of you have had similar paths. About, and this is kind of just an interesting thought, I think. If you're a parent, did your children influence your thoughts on open source, free software, software licensing, etc.? I mean, it seems weird that you're having children would influence your thoughts in such a way, but for me, it really, really was the case. Because as a parent, whatever you do, ultimately is for them. And so you want the work that you do, the things that you surround them with, the life that you build, you want it to be good for them. And I think from that point of view, one has to sit back and say, at least from my point of view, free software is the way to go for them. Anyway, total random, very weird, I don't know, oddly personal, funky episode here. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you are having an amazing week. I hope you're having an amazing life. And I don't know what else to talk about now, so I'm going to push the stop recording button and wish you all a very happy February. I need to get a drink. Not alcohol. I'm just really thirsty. I'm just really, really thirsty right now. See you guys later.